Hello, my name is Daniel Sweetser, and I'm reading this morning from my novel Hope Starts Small. I'm reading Chapter 6, Part 3, Driving. When Frank and Constance had lived in Illinois, they were just south of the border of Wisconsin. Frank's parents had decided to move from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin for a season, and for Frank especially, it was nice having them close. They were within easy driving distance, and the family was able to visit often and let little Jeremiah have time with his grandparents. But as the seasons changed, eventually Frank's parents decided that it was best for them to move to Florida. This bewildered Frank. At this point, Zoe was newly born, and he had hoped for them to have more time with the kids. But they were determined to do it, sold quickly, and made their way down to near the coast. In many ways, the move was very good for them. Frank's dad went to the beach every day, and he and Frank's mom would bike regularly. They found churches where they could serve and got to watch rocket launches from their backyard. Even the hurricanes didn't seem to bother them. Grandma would respond to concerned messages by saying, "It rained some." They were largely unfazed. Because of the move, it became clear that the only way to maintain any real relationship would involve significant travel. No one in the family was inclined to fly, and Frank and his family were rarely able to attempt the long trip down. In the end, and to their credit, it was Frank's parents who bore the brunt of the burden, driving many, many hours to see Frank, Constance, and the kids. They must have visited at least 10 times after Frank and Constance moved to New York, and that was 20 hours one way to drive. Sometimes Grandma would do it solo, coming up to help with kids or painting the house or some other need that the family had. Sometimes both her and Grandpa would come. They drove other places, of course. They made the most of the trips by visiting other family along the way or their old haunts in Pennsylvania, or going to political rallies. But Frank was grateful that they were willing to make the trek up, and to let a visit to him and the family be a large part of that trip. He, Constance, and the kids never did visit them in Florida. The closest they got was Georgia, where they met for a friend's wedding. On that visit, Frank's parents had met them in Georgia and come back up with them through Kentucky. At a certain point, Frank's parents bought an RV. This was fitting for them, given the distance to relatives and how often they traveled. After a few years, they decided to move from Florida to Tennessee. In true appropriated gypsy spirit, they lived in that RV while they were closing on their home in Tennessee. It wouldn't have been possible otherwise. Then they sold their home in Florida and made the big move north-ish. It struck Frank how different they were than Opa. They traveled light and were willing and able to uproot and move when the time seemed right. They did what they said, and they did it quickly. You might not always agree with them, as Frank often didn't, but they certainly weren't idle dreamers. A long time before, after Frank had graduated high school, his dad had taken a job on the East Coast. At the time, the family was living in West Virginia, and Frank's mom and the kids, still at home, didn't go with Grandpa. So for a few years, he had lived during the week in a rented place near his office, and then came home on the weekends. He slowly took different jobs over time that got him closer and closer to home, until finally Grandma was ready and they moved to Pennsylvania. Frank's dad had done a lot of driving during that time, and it was essential. The driving was the expression of his dedication to his wife and children. And so in the same way, Frank saw the long drive his parents would take regularly from Florida to upstate New York. To Frank, the 20-hour drive, the gas, hotels, and all the other costs that came with the trip were a clear, direct way that his parents were saying, "We love you." They showed up, and it meant the world to him. All right, thank you for listening. I hope you have an awesome day.